Welcome to Indiana Sports Beat Radio, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
Looks over the middle, second guesses, fires, throws. Does he make the catch in the end zone? Yes! Touchdown! Oladipo to win it.
Another one!
He got
Another
it!
one! Another one! Huge hole! He's at the 30! He's gonna go! 10, 5, touchdown! Jonathan Taylor!
Galloway finds Rob Finnessy, fires the three, and
He hit it!
Now, from the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios, here's your host, Jim Coyle.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Indiana Sports Beat Radio. John, the producer, here again this morning, alongside Dustin Schutte from Saturday Tradition, taking over as we did on Wednesday, as we await the arrival of everyone's favorite lovable host, Jim Coyle. Dustin, what a freaking crazy night of basketball. Obviously, since this is Indiana Sports Beat, Indiana's season ended in a pretty terrible fashion last night. I mean, but it is the product of playing so many games in a short amount of time with all of the travel that they have done. So there's an excuse, even though you don't want there to be an excuse. And I know the coaches and players aren't going to use that as an excuse, but overall, it's a disappointing result on the Indiana side of things. We also have plenty of other games to talk about. Obviously, the headlining result being the 15th seeded St. Peter's Peacocks, the P-Foul, took down the number 2 seed Kentucky Wildcats. And I just got to say, I live in Kentucky, obviously, for those. Some of you know that, some of you don't. Deal with Kentucky fans, and most of them are great people. I've come to really appreciate the fandom of Kentucky basketball, but I decided to listen into the KSR postgame show last night. And it's something I've never decided to do, obviously because I'm not a UK fan. But listening to that for an hour and 15 minutes, I listened to the whole thing, believe it or not. It is so interesting to listen to. I don't necessarily want to call it the anguish, but the way that they look into something so harshly. And I know Indiana fans do the same thing. But the way that they judge everything, it's March Madness. I feel like there's so much overreaction. And I know you don't want to be the victim of losing to a 15 seed. No team wants to be that. But I feel like during March, there's so much overreaction when those things happen to your team, that the one that you like and the one that you follow. A lot of them were calling it the worst loss in the history of the program. And maybe that's true. I don't know. But I just wanted to share those thoughts because I decided to listen in on that post-game show, and there were so many angry callers and different analysis and thoughts on that. But back to the reason we're here, Indiana St. Mary's. Dustin, what are your thoughts on what went down last night for the Hoosiers?
Well, I'm going to say that I flipped the game because there were so many good games going on last night. I mean, you looked at Vermont, Arkansas, St. Peter's, Kentucky, San Francisco, and Murray State. There are just so many good quality basketball games, Akron, UCLA, that I turned it off because you got the sense after about 4 to 5 minutes into that second half that it was over. Indiana just wasn't – the thing about some of these other games that they've played is typically their defense has been there, and it wasn't on Thursday night. It just wasn't. They've played 5 games in 8 days. They had to travel from Bloomington to Dayton, then to Portland. On top of that, their flight was delayed by 3-4 hours. So I think you just saw the culmination of all of that, and it compiled into one of the ugliest losses that you'll see. But I think if you're an Indiana fan, Thursday night was frustrating, but you did get back into the tournament. You did win a game in the tournament. And I think those are steps in the right direction. It didn't end the way you wanted it to. They lost by what? What did they? Well, I don't even remember the final score. They lost by about 30 points.
Yeah, about 30.
There's some ugliness there that you got to clean up. But I think that when you look at where this program was under Archie Miller, never making the NCAA tournament, always kind of falling apart in February and March, this team did the exact same thing, but they were able to respond to that adversity. They were able to basically, they were out of the tournament, and they were able to erase a 17-point deficit to Michigan. Then they beat Illinois. Then they go into the first four, and then they beat Wyoming. They found ways to win some of those games that they hadn't won before. So I think you can at least appreciate the kind of run this team had, the fact that Trace Jackson Davis took over in those final 5-6 games. They were just out of gas on Thursday night. I don't think there's any doubt about that. It had nothing to do with what St. Mary's was doing. It had nothing to do with effort. I think that they were just dead tired because St. Mary's is not 30 points better than Indiana. We know that. That's a team they're a good team. And on any given day on a neutral floor, I think they probably could have won that game by 6 to 8 points. But I also think Indiana would have been a lot more competitive if this was just your traditional round one game without having that first four situation.
And that's honestly a wake-up call to the NCAA. You have to see what played out over these past several hours and realize if you want to put a better product on the floor, you can't let these things happen. I understand, we talked about this on Wednesday. We were all already preemptively making excuses for what could happen if a situation occurred like this, and it unfortunately did. But, I'm losing my train of thought because I'm looking at too many different things at once. On the same topic, St. Mary's head coach Randy Bennett, he made a comment in the postgame last night saying that his guys wore Indiana down, and he saw the side effects of the Hoosiers' recent travel set in.
Yep.
So if the coaches of the team that won understood, he also made a comment. I can't find the tweet that I liked that had this comment. He understood the fact that Indiana not only had the travel stuff going on, but they didn't have adequate time to actually prepare for St. Mary's. St. Mary's hadn't played since, I think it had been 6 or 7 days. So they knew they were going to be playing either Indiana or Wyoming, and they weren't playing other games before that. So all they had to do was focus on that one particular matchup that was coming their way. Indiana was just trying to win with whatever was thrown in front of them. So the NCAA, obviously, they're not going to get rid of the first four, and they shouldn't. But when you have the first four, I really like the idea you had a few days ago, Dustin. Play in Dayton for the first four and then stay in Dayton. Dayton, Ohio should just be a permanent first-round site so you don't have to have all these travel issues.
Right. I mean, you can extend that. It doesn't even necessarily have to be in Dayton. I mean, but to go from Dayton then to Portland, like I said, there's a lot of different cities have hosted games. Cleveland, Milwaukee, Chicago, Indianapolis, Detroit. I mean, there's a lot of different cities from Louisville. There's a lot of different cities from around in that area where you could take a bus ride. I mean, as soon as that game's over, you could take a bus to the next hotel, and we're still not talking about this, right? You just to have them. And by the way, the NCAA had all kinds of travel issues anyway, and I don't know that the plane situation for Indiana was the NCAA's fault, but Colorado State didn't get to Indianapolis. They had a delayed flight until Tuesday morning. Longwood, they had travel issues. Tennessee had some travel issues, all with the NCAA. So they've got to get that figured out. I don't know how this isn't taken care of months in advance. And I know you don't know the teams months in advance, but you would think you would have a pretty good idea of how you're going to operate this whole situation, because it's the biggest tournament. It's your biggest money maker, and you've been doing it for decades. So I don't quite understand that. But I mean, yeah, either have a first two rounds in Dayton, or make the round next located close enough where these guys can take a bus or a short flight, as opposed to, like I said, 5 hour flight from Dayton to Portland. I mean, that's insane.
Yeah. And now, I mean, and putting that behind us, there's one other thing I guess we kind of need to mention before we get through the end of this segment. Now that we're heading to the off season, Indiana's got tons of questions to answer when it comes to the way the roster is going to look going into, the 2022-2023 season. Obviously, the big one is the transfer portal. We don't know what's going to happen with that. And with that, Indiana, if you just say that let's just say nobody on this roster decided to leave, you're going to have to get rid of 3 scholarships. So logically, 3 people are going to be moving on in some capacity. Who is that going to be? Obviously, we don't know yet. I've got 3 candidates in mind based on what has already happened that could that seem realistic in my head. Two of those being the guys who participated in senior night, Race Thompson and Parker Stewart. That obviously is one domino that kind of helps you narrow down who it could be. And then Trace Jackson Davis. Earlier at the beginning of the season, or even when he decided last year that he was going to come back, the way that he stated it was that he was going to stay for one more year. Now, obviously, that can be taken with a grain of salt. You don't really know how they're going to be feeling in this current moment. But when you consider the fact that you're going to need to free up 3 scholarships, and if nobody else intends on transferring, which we don't know that right now, that almost gives him an extra incentive to just go ahead and say, you know what, I'm going to test the waters out in the NBA or somewhere professionally, just so I can free up this scholarship.
Well, I mean, everybody from every program, I think, has dealt with people transferring out. So I can't imagine that it's not going to affect Indiana in some capacity this year. So I think when you pair the fact that some of these guys took part in senior night, as you mentioned, Trace Jackson Davis is probably going to the next level at this stage, considering, I mean, I don't know how much his draft stock rose, but it rose at least a little bit over those last 5-6 games, going back to the Big Ten tournament and then into the NCAA tournament. And then you're going to lose some guys to the transfer portal. That's just how it's going to be. You don't know if it's going to be a star player, if it's going to be somebody at the end of the bench. But, I mean, the way the transfer portal works, it's going to happen. So I don't think scholarship issues are going to be a problem, because I do think between senior night, between Trace Jackson Davis probably going to the NBA, and then the guys you're going to lose to the transfer portal, I don't think there's going to have to be any I don't think there's going to have to be any tough decisions to be made or anything like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's always going to be a puzzle every year now, just trying to make sure you fill the amount that you need and that you're not over. It kind of adds an interesting dynamic to the offseason. Obviously, you don't want all of your players to transfer out and have to figure out that issue. But you would think that since you've already gone through the coaching change, you're able to retain so much through that. You had success this season by getting to the NCAA tournament. I wouldn't think that there's going to be a lot of people opting out, I would say, of this Indiana program now that you've seen what Mike Woodson can do with you from the perspective of the players through one season.
I mean, I don't know if I agree with that.
I'm not saying everybody. I'm sure
right.
There will be a couple of guys, and I'm not even talking about Race Thompson and Parker Stewart. Some of the younger guys especially, I wouldn't be surprised to see them hop in the transfer portal.
But I mean, you look at Illinois last year. They had Adam Miller, who was, I don't know if he was a sixth man or he came off the bench and moved into the starting role. I don't remember exactly what his role was, but he was a freshman at Illinois. He was really good. He came into his role late in the season. He decided to transfer. You look at some of those guys from Rutgers, Miles Johnson, Chris Young, Jacob Young, maybe. I can't remember if it's Chris Young or Jacob Young, so apologize on that. But they had 2 or 3 guys that were key cogs for their team, and they decided to hit the transfer portal. Imagine how good they could have been if those guys returned. You never know. It could be a starting guard or a starting forward, or it could be, like we said, the 12th or 13th guy on the bench. You never truly know, because you don't know what's going on through these kids' heads. So, yeah, just because a guy plays well doesn't necessarily mean he's not going to hit the transfer portal. It's going to be interesting to see how that affects Indiana. I mean, I agree with your point that I think Mike Woodson has probably earned the respect of the players in that locker room, and now Indiana's a little bit more appealing because it looks like the program is at least trajecting in the right way. I could go on a rant about the transfer portal and how I don't like it, but that's.
Well, to your point, if I'm not mistaken, last year Kofi Coburn put his name in the transfer portal, right?
He did.
He was considering going to Kentucky. I mean,
right,
so
because
that proves what you're talking about. It doesn't matter what level you're on. If you want to play for a better program, a program that could win a national title per se, that makes perfect sense. So I get where you're coming from.
But that's not even it. I mean, yes, you're right. If you want to play for a national championship, if you think somebody else has a better shot. But the other part of this is when Kofi put his name in the transfer portal, he was also in the NBA draft. I mean, there's NIL that these kids are considering. And we just heard Casey Thompson from Nebraska. Well, I just heard, I don't know if anybody else heard this, but in an interview with Barstool Sports and Bussin' with the Boys, he said you can make 6 figures as a starter at Nebraska. And now that's a starting football player. but you're telling me that they can't get a pretty nice chunk of change if you're a pretty good basketball player like Bryce McGowan's. So there's going to be other factors there, because there's going to be people in these kids' ears, whether they're agents, whether they're family members. Hey, put your name in the transfer portal. See if anybody's got some NIL opportunities for you. I guarantee that's going to happen. So it basically becomes a little bit of free agency, and we've talked about it. There needs to be some restrictions on this, but again, that's going to be a different topic for either later today or a different day. But that's why you can't just look at a guy's performance for the team, how impactful he was, and say, yeah, that guy's going to be back next season. We don't know, because there's so many extenuating circumstances and so many outliers right now that it's created, I hate to use this term because it's overused, but the wild, wild west.
Yeah, I agree, but we're gonna go ahead and take our first break. We're gonna bring on Alec Lasley from thehoosier.com. Maybe we'll hear from Jim Coyle, maybe we won't. But either way, we're gonna stay here with you. Listen to Indiana Sports Beat Radio, brought to you by the MyWow Network. We'll be right back right after this.
We'll be right back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
Whether you're visiting...
What's going on, Alec?
How's it going? No Jimbo this morning?
Well, I know he's awake, or at least was awake, because I called him 10 minutes before the show started, but he sounded like he was dying because of all the travel and stuff that he's dealt with. His voice sounded shot.
Not surprised. What's up,
But
Dustin?
he didn't say explicitly that he wasn't going to be on here, so.
Gotcha. Is he flying out today then, I assume, or is he leaving
I
tomorrow?
kind of figured he'd stay till Saturday or Sunday, but like regardless of result.
Yeah.
I'm going to go grab some coffee. I'll be right back.
I have to admit, I was glad I don't have to cover Indiana exclusively, because the other games were so good last night.
Yep. Yeah. Honestly, I think we say this every single year, right? Like Thursday and Friday, there seems to be so many great games. The tournament gets off to a great start every single season, or every single year, it looks like. But I don't know. Last night, yesterday, there were some really, really good games and really big stunners that I don't think I really remember from year in and year out to that magnitude. Obviously, like the Iowa game,
Right.
Obviously Kentucky, Gonzaga, struggling for 30 plus minutes.
Right.
So obviously some blowouts, but for the most part, I think all those games were pretty phenomenal from start to finish, or at least you had one or two in every time segment there that were pretty good for the most part. So that was definitely a fun first day, I will say. Yeah. Outside of obviously the 2.5 hours that IU is on the floor.
Right. Yep. Exactly. Yeah, it was awesome.
I was saying earlier, Alec, and I'm probably not going to bring it up again just because I just had to mention it at the beginning. But I listened to the KSR post game show last night after you.
I'm sure that was great.
Yeah, it was pretty fun.
Oh man.
Can you guys hear
the vacuum? I heard something, but you can't tell what it is.
No, there's a husky that lives beside me, and Jesus, it sounds like it's being murdered. I don't know if that's typical of huskies, but it does it every day. Every day.
I've watched videos of huskies like being crate trained, and man, they sound like they're dying whenever they're screaming and whatnot. So that checks out. All right, we got a few seconds.
Of Indiana Sports Beat Radio on the homepage or on the station every week, Monday through Friday. If we're not on a station where you live, we should be. Ask for Indiana Sports Beat Radio. This segment is brought to you by Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington. Now back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
Welcome back, Indiana Sports Beat Radio. John, the producer, Dustin Schutte here, alongside now as well, Alec Lasley from thehoosier.com. Alec, we've already been getting the ball rolling, talking about this Indiana loss in the round of 64 to St. Mary's, nearly a 30-point loss. I can't remember the exact deficit, but Alec, it wasn't really the best of ways for Mike Woodson's squad to go out last night.
Yeah, it obviously wasn't. I think that's going to put a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths here, the way that season now finished up. But when you kind of take a step back, you look at the year as a whole. You look at obviously getting back to the NCAA tournament, winning that first round game, obviously in the first four, which regardless of what you think, it's still an NCAA tournament win. I think overall, really, really good year. There were definitely a lot of ups and downs, but I think if you, like I said, take a step back, realize where this program was a year ago today, definitely some good things on the horizon for Indiana. And I think it's just obviously a very disappointing way to go out. But at the end of the day, you saw them on the floor yesterday, and I know a lot of people don't want to make this excuse, and it's not so much to be an excuse, but that team was absolutely exhausted from the tip. You could tell mentally, even more so than physically. And that was why I think that St. Mary's opponent was going to be so difficult for them, whichever team won, whether it was Wyoming or Indiana, but more so Indiana going, 5 games in 7 days, 4 different cities, a different time zone. The whole issue with the flight, even if the flight wasn't an issue, getting out to Portland, that's just a quick turnaround in a lot of very, very mentally grueling games over the last week and a half to 2 weeks for Indiana. And you could just tell, definitely in the first half, but after halftime, it looked like that team was, and again, not checked out, because they never really checked out this season, but just mentally and physically absolutely drained.
Do you think that the NCAA will look at this particular situation and change the way that they do the first four in regards to travel? Because one thing Dustin's discussed, and it doesn't necessarily have to be this exact thing, but play the first four and then make the first four that's in Dayton or whatever site it may be. It doesn't have to be Dayton. Keep the first four winners in that same location for the first and second rounds to avoid all of this extra travel, especially when you're sending teams out west to places like Portland and San Diego.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're going to do anything, because at the end of the day, there's still been in all but 1 year so far a play-in winner that's at least won the round of 64 game. So they're going to look at that as, why would we change anything when these teams are still winning, right? I think 5 of the teams since 2011, since the inception of the first four, has gone on to the Sweet 16. So I don't necessarily think that's the issue, but I think the matchups have to really be looked at, because you can't put Indiana hypothetically right in this situation where they were at, from the Midwest, flying out to the West Coast to play a West Coast team when they haven't had to travel. I mean, at the end of the day, you're still going to have to go out there and play the game, but I think you can definitely do a little bit more to send them maybe, to the East Coast, still haven't given them some travel, but not really dealing a lot with the time change and everything, because that does put them behind the 8 ball. And whether you want to say it or not, right, that's a reason for that loss last night. Now, if Indiana was fully healthy and fully rested up, they may have still lost the game, right? But, that rest is not going to make up most likely a 30-point deficit. But it's also something that you really have to look at, because this Indiana team has not been blown out like that, and has not been physically and mentally dominated for a full 40 minutes this season. And they definitely were last night.
Dustin?
And Alec, what's interesting to me is, all throughout the season, we break down games. We try to look at the things that happen in the game to explain away the wins or the losses. But to me, I thought that you hit the nail on the head. Like, I don't know that there's anything to break down from Thursday night other than the fact that Indiana was just exhausted. Because you see it primarily, what stood out to me was on the defensive end, and especially those first 4 minutes in the second half. Like you said, you could just tell, even in that Michigan game when they were getting blown out by 15, 17 points, their defense was playing okay. They just weren't hitting some shots. But I wasn't there, we weren't there, but you can just tell when a team's exhausted. Like I don't know that there's any analysis, and people look at that 30-point score and what went wrong. But to me, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's just they were out of gas, and there's nothing really else to look at. I mean, do you have that same thought?
Yeah, well, 100%. And their offense really struggled because of that, and they got back into those old ways of let's try to force feed Trace Jackson Davis. They did that in the first half against Wyoming, and that's why they really struggled in that game. And once they put in Tamar Bates and Xavier Johnson, they started to get out in transition, get back into that offensive groove of kind of pushing the tempo and pushing the pace that has done them so well over the last month to get them into this situation. But yeah, last night it was the same thing of, you could really tell they were exhausted, and you could tell more so by all those layups and shots within the paint that they missed. Now, granted, they still missed a lot of shots throughout the course of the season that same way, but it's not like they were disrupted by size. St. Mary's isn't a big team. They're a physical team. And that's when the biggest thing I think you look at is, we can get into this a little bit more, but the play of Race Thompson over the last few games has really suffered. And a large part of that is due to those heavy minutes that he's been playing and due to the physical play of postseason basketball. And, that's a big thing when you rely a lot on two post players to get you a large majority of your offense and do a lot on both ends of the floor. And so I think it's definitely a great, I don't want to say great moment, but definitely a very good experience for Mike Woodson to now go through the grueling Big Ten stretch, late in the season of having to win big time games to get yourself in a situation, go in, make a run in the Big Ten tournament, which I think Indiana fans should expect Indiana to do every single year. They just haven't been doing that. And then go in and at least win a game or two in the NCAA tournament. And I know fans, want to get back to Sweet 16s immediately. But this was a very important step for the program, a very, very important step for Mike Woodson. He's done everything he said he was going to do in year one. And I think now he has so much more experience to really see how you need to build a roster. And he had a vision of what he tried to do. And I think he did exactly what he wanted to do in the offseason to make this roster able to compete. It's just some of those pieces didn't fully mesh and come together. Not saying the chemistry issues, but they just didn't play up to their potential. But I think now he really sees what he needs out of a roster to make a deep postseason run. And so I think in a lot of ways, the last couple of weeks were, outside of obviously the wins that they had, just really, really important for Mike Woodson.
One other thing that many fans seem to take issue with last night, and he had done it before earlier in the season. I don't remember how many games this occurred in, but he did a platoon-style sub in the first half that kind of seemed to deflate all of the momentum and give St. Mary's a chance to get back in the game whenever Indiana was ahead. What do you think went into that? Do you think this had a lot to do with the fatigue and all of that? I'm sure that's probably one of the main reasons you would expect it to be. But when it hasn't worked before, what do you think made Mike Woodson go back to doing that?
Yeah, I mean, he talked about it post-game after Wyoming and then pre-game before St. Mary's earlier this week, just that he's going to have to do a lot more with his rotations just due to the amount of games and the amount of minutes that a lot of these players are playing. And again, look at the amount of minutes that these starters, at least 4 out of the 5 starters, play on a nightly basis. And they're expected to do a lot on both ends of the floor. And when you don't have consistent production from the bench, I've been saying this all year, and that's been the biggest thing with his rotations and why he has kept guys out on the floor for as long as he has and not put in as many minutes from bench guys is due to the really inconsistent play off of the bench. And it's happened throughout the entire season. Towards the end of the year, we obviously started to get a little bit more production, especially when Trey Galloway was out there. You knew what you were going to get from him, and the Jordan Geronimo obviously really emerged. But in the whole grand scheme of things, this Indiana bench was really bad all season and was really not consistent. And that put a lot of pressure on Mike Woodson to get as many minutes and as much production out of his starters that he doesn't want to rely on them that many minutes and for that much production. But when you're not getting it from your bench, you have to stick with your starters. And he said that a few times about sticking with guys like, Miller Kopp or Parker Stewart or Race Thompson, who has been struggling. One, they're seniors. They've been through this before. They're probably, if these guys had maybe 2 or 3, 4 more games this season, they probably would have figured it out and broken out of this little mini slump that a guy like Parker Stewart's been on over the last month, and Race Thompson, obviously. But they didn't have that. And unfortunately, it's just kind of the way that the cookie crumbles sometimes. But no, I think, like I said, this tournament run, these past couple of weeks really, really helped Mike Woodson in looking into next year and in the years beyond of how to put together and fill out a full roster. Now when he's not going to be trying to play catch up and just trying to keep players on the roster.
Alec, I think this is really difficult to do when you're in it, when you're in the season, because you go by game, week by week type of situation. But you look back at the totality of this season, and I think that there's going to be some Indiana fans that have maybe a little bit of frustration. You have that 5-game losing streak there. You could have put yourself in a better position to maybe not play in one of those first 4 games. But I think when you look at the totality of the season, if you were to say you lost those 5 games, but you sprinkled them throughout the season instead of that 5-game stretch, you look back, this is a team that beat Purdue, they beat Ohio State, they beat Notre Dame, they had a solid run in the Big Ten tournament, which hasn't happened in, it feels like, decades. And then you get back to March Madness. I mean, I don't know what more you could have done. Again, when you look at the whole schedule, you look at the whole season, and don't break it down week by week, game by game. I don't think there's anything that Indiana fans could have asked for more in Mike Woodson's first season, given he didn't have any college coaching experience coming into this job, given he had all those players that initially, once Archie Miller was fired, hit the transfer portal. I mean, I was just really impressed. And I know that there were some lows, but I think when you look at the record, look at the run they had in the Big Ten tournament, you finally snapped that losing streak to Purdue. You got a big win over Ohio State. You beat Illinois, and you get back to March Madness. I mean, right now, I know you said fans want the Sweet 16, Elite 8, and a Final Four chance immediately. That doesn't always happen. So I think from what we saw in year 1 of Mike Woodson, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about this program moving forward.
Oh, 100%, absolutely. And I think the biggest, fans are going to look back at that Northwestern game when those 5 players were suspended as a real turning point, obviously, in the season. And, if you look at it, Indiana wins that game, most likely if all those players are there. And that probably means that they're not playing in the play-in game. Maybe they make another run, but at the same time, you probably don't make the end-of-season run and have the same play from a guy like Xavier Johnson, who I think took that and really learned and really grew exponentially after that suspension. And that really kickstarted Indiana because of the play of Xavier Johnson. So when you look back at that moment this season, I think that's probably going to be the biggest moment out of Mike Woodson's tenure, or at least obviously so far here. And you look at the decision that he made as a real major turning point for the program, I think, just due to the fact that he is trying to rebuild this program, trying to get them back to the Indiana of old. And you can't go through not only college basketball or sports, but more importantly, life and kind of make these mistakes and not have any sort of repercussions to it. And I think that's the biggest thing is Mike Woodson setting a standard in a groundwork for the program that really has been missing over the last decade almost. And that's unfortunate that it's gotten to that point where you look at a game in February in a really, really successful season at that point, and you say that we really, really lacked a lot of leadership. And that's really unfortunate. But at the same time, I think the leadership that you really got after that point and moving forward throughout this program, whether or not a guy like Xavier Johnson comes back next year, even that leadership that he showed down the stretch this season is instrumental, I think, for Indiana's growth as a program, and specifically Mike Woodson showing that, hey, I know exactly what my vision is for Indiana basketball, and there's really nothing that's going to stop me from getting there. And either you're going to join me for that ride, or I don't need you. And he basically said that the days after that suspension, and he's made it quite evident that if he wants you, he's going to do everything and anything to help you succeed and be in your corner 110%. And if he doesn't think you can provide value, one, he's not going to play you. He's going to probably show you exactly what you need to do. And we heard him yesterday in the postgame say for the guys that are returning for next year, he's going to make them watch every single game that they played in this season and really break down all their strengths and weaknesses. And I think this program is definitely, like I said before, and like you've said, this program is in a much better place now. And it's just unfortunate the way that season ended last night. That is really just going to put a stain, I think, on in a lot of people's minds of what Indiana is and how far Indiana has truly come since the start of the season in November.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to be back with more Alec Lasley. Thanks for listening to Indiana Sports Beat Radio. We're brought to you by Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington. As always, we'll be right back after this.
We'll be right back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
An Evansville tradition for
Alec, next I was going to go into the potential scholarship issue going into next season. We brought that up earlier. And obviously, you can predict anything you want with that, as I tried to, but you could also be very wrong with all of it because of this extra dynamic of the transfer portal. I think if there was no transfer portal, what I predicted earlier would be correct, which was Trace goes to the NBA, Parker and Race graduate, or just become grad transfers, one or the other. That's the easy way out. But with so many other extra parts to this now, that's probably not necessarily going to be the way that it plays out.
Yep.
And then I'll remember if you mentioned Jordan Geronimo, but I'll bring him up as well in his improvement over the past couple of games, or really since the Big Ten tournament, I guess.
Yep. Sounds good.
I wonder if we'll hear from Jim today.
Well, maybe a little bit later.
I'm curious. I don't know. Honestly, I wonder, he may be watching right now and just be like, it's going fine. I might pop in later. I might not.
Yeah. Who knows?
Where is, there we go. Southern Stone. Let's try it. I'm going to hit some of these comments before we come back.
I was going to say, maybe our viewership isn't great right now because of how
we've got 70 people watching. Usually whenever
really?
I'm hosting a show, it's not nearly that many. And I've never hosted a full show, so there's not much evidence to any of what I'm saying anyway.
Well, it had nothing to do with you. It had everything to do with the fact that Indiana got the doors blown off and those games were on till after midnight.
Yeah. Whenever I hosted the post game with Dean Garrett, we had like 150 people watching, but that was also right after Purdue. The win against Purdue. I'm going to need another cup of coffee. I'm already almost done with this one. I'm just glad we don't have any obscure guests on today. And what I mean by obscure is just non-IU related guests, because I have no idea what to do whenever those people are on.
I could have covered some of them.
I barely know anything about the Colts, the Pacers. I used to pay attention a lot more to both, but I haven't in years.
I can I've watched the Pacers. I can I shouldn't say make stuff up, but the offseason, I follow the Colts more than I do in the in-season because it's slower for me.
All right, here we go.
More Honda, now in Bloomington.
This segment is brought to you by Southern Stone Restaurant. Now back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
Welcome back to Indiana Sports Beat Radio. Alec Lasley and Dustin Schutte with us right now, talking about the loss Indiana took last night to St. Mary's, season-ending loss in the round of 64. Overall, a great improved season for Indiana in Mike Woodson's first year, but now you've got his first full offseason. And I guess you could say that he had a full offseason last year, but you're also adjusting to a whole lot of different things. You've now been here we're coming up on the anniversary of his hiring. This past year was the beginning of the transfer portal. He kind of got a late start to that. And so this year, it's a whole new ball game. We've had 1 year with all of these new different parts of the NCAA tree, whatever you want to call it. But Mike Woodson's going to have to find a way around this 3 extra scholarship issue. And I obviously earlier in the show, I mentioned the simple way out of it, which would be by Parker Stewart and Race Thompson either becoming grad transfers and Trace Jackson Davis moving on to the NBA. That seems like the easy way to deal with all of this. But now in this age of the transfer portal, there's no telling what's going to happen. You have anybody who has this one-time transfer option to go wherever they want, whatever team may be able to give them better NIL deals, as Dustin Schutte was talking about. What is the path for Mike Woodson, Alec? And I know it's not clearly defined, but where do you think Mike Woodson goes with this?
Yeah, I mean, he's talked about over the last year, not only, building through recruiting classes, but at the same time knowing the importance of the transfer portal and kind of that free agency, right, of college basketball that it's really turned into over the last year, but even more so and more specifically with that COVID year that everyone gets now, and that one-time transfer rule to play immediately. So there's a lot, like you said, that really goes into this situation and kind of building a roster. And that's why it's so difficult for these coaches and more so for these recruits to really know what the roster is going to look like, because a lot of these programs are going to have huge turnover every single season. And that's just the nature of the game at this point. But at the same time, you're still going to have to build through the transfer portal, regardless of what you bring in through the high school classes. And I think that's one thing that Mike Woodson's really going to lean on heavily, at least over the next 2 years, to kind of really bridge this gap between getting, and I hate to keep saying this, but getting his players in versus the players that have been on the roster over the last year that he kind of inherited, to really make sure that program is still staying true to kind of the framework that he wants to build off of, but at the same time still winning, right? And that's the biggest difficulty is making sure that you have both going on at the same time, of being able to put together a competent roster to go out there and compete in the Big Ten, but also still building the groundwork and the framework for the future of the program with some of these young guys who are going to come through the program, learn through the program, and be here for multiple years. But yeah, I mean, Mike Woodson's gonna have to land a big time player, especially in the front court. In the transfer portal, they're still looking at a couple 2022 guys to potentially come in, whether they're on the wing or up front as well. But at the end of the day, Mike Woodson needs a playmaker in that front court position to come in and compete immediately. And you look at the production that they're going to lose, whether it's both Trace Jackson Davis and Race Thompson or just one of them. That production is. Again, that was the backbone of this Indiana team for the majority of this season. They have a huge role that they need to fill in that specific spot, and you're not going to get that with the true freshman coming in. You need a guy who has played, whether it's in the Big Ten, whether it's in a Power 5 conference, or honestly, whether it's even just in a mid-major conference. There's a ton of good players who have shown that they can compete in high major conferences that come from mid-majors. They need to go out and land a couple bodies that are college ready, who can come in and compete immediately and help kind of bridge this gap for Mike Woodson.
And I think the interesting thing about the transfer portal, Alec, is in the Big Ten specifically, and this might be the case in other conferences, but I don't follow them as closely. I mean, you really depend on, you look at Michigan State, you look at Purdue, Illinois, even a lot of those teams depend on veteran leadership and kind of building a team. And so I think that you're right in the fact that Indiana's still going to continue. Mike Woodson's going to continue to try to build the program through recruiting. But nowadays, you do almost have to have that one guy, or maybe it's two guys that you're able to come in that can, whether it's in a leadership role, whether it's in a role player, you can find that one guy through the transfer portal. And I think that you can be optimistic about what Indiana is bringing in on the recruiting front. Look at this season and say the program's heading in the right direction. But they're also, especially if Race Thompson and Trace Jackson Davis are both gone, like you mentioned, they are going to need somebody in the front court. And you'd probably like to get that piece through the transfer portal as opposed to recruiting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at just two of the better teams consistently year after year in the Big Ten, Michigan State and in Illinois here as of late. And they both build a lot through their recruiting and their high school recruiting. But at the same time, they still go out there and land, whether they're role players who fit specific roles for that team. Michigan State goes out and gets Tyson Walker or Joey Hauser right over the last few years here, who have now been a major part of their team over the last couple of seasons here. Obviously, Tyson Walker, just a first-year guy for Michigan State this year, but it really looks like to be the point guard of the future for a couple years here for Michigan State. And then you look at Alfonso Plummer and Jacob Grandison for Illinois. Those two guys, Illinois would be a much different team without both of those guys on that roster. And you need, again, guys who are probably going to be here for more than one season. I think that's the best way to really bridge the gap in the transfer portal is get those guys who can be there for 2 years. A guy who's going to be a junior, get him in there and have the expectation that he's going to stay, or at least the ability for him to stay an extra year. And that way you don't have to have the roster turnover every single season, where you're putting a lot of pressure year after year to continually land a big time player out of the transfer portal. And that's why if you get guys who can stay for 2 seasons, that's really how you bridge that gap, especially in the next kind of 2 to 4 years before that first recruiting class kind of goes through the program. But at the same time, I mean, you look at all the key big time programs around the country, and no matter what they get out of the transfer portal, they still have built a great foundation from their recruiting classes. And that's when you see guys that are juniors and seniors become all conference players, but don't really have much of a career before their junior or senior season, because they go through the grind of sitting behind an upperclassman. I mean, you see this mostly, with guards at Wisconsin, right? They sometimes struggle early in their career, or even at Iowa too, right? I mean, Michigan State, another perfect example of some of these point guards that don't play a lot as freshmen and sophomores, but then are huge parts to the team as juniors and seniors. And that's what Indiana needs to do, is find those guys who, which he has, is find those guys who are going to be there for 3-4 seasons, may not have a huge impact as a freshman, but slowly develop and then become those guys that every team hates to see as a junior and senior. And the only way that you can really do that is get those guys out of the transfer portal that are going to be there for 2 years, because you can't continuously add 3-4 players out of the transfer portal to make immediate impacts year after year and expect your program to continue to get better and better. That puts a lot of pressure on your staff to not only recruit out of high school, but recruit against now even more programs in the transfer portal. But that's the key, is being able to get those multi-year guys out of the portal.
And you could really say that Christian Lander falls into that category of a guard who's been behind so many other more veteran guards for Indiana. And people have been speculating this all season. Is he going to look to go somewhere else where he can get that playing time? Because, I mean, you're still going to have, unless Xavier Johnson can't transfer back out. He's already used the one-time transfer rule. Now, if he's a graduate student, that reopens it up, I'm sure, right? You can leave once you're a graduate student. So, and I don't know where Xavier Johnson falls in his academic career right now, but you're still behind Xavier Johnson. Rob Finney will have to make a decision. If both of those guys stick around, it's hard to see where Christian Lander will be able to find that playing time in the future.
Yeah. Obviously, it's definitely an unfortunate situation, just kind of what Christian Lander, has had at Indiana. I don't necessarily think him reclassifying was a bad decision, and it definitely wasn't at this point, because he didn't, really exhaust any of that eligibility with the COVID year that he gets back from it. So he basically had a redshirt year and still got game action as a freshman when he reclassified. So for people to say that hurt his development, I don't necessarily think that, because he could have, averaged 25 points a game in high school. But if you're that much better than the competition in high school in your league, right, he could have transferred maybe to a prep school and gotten more of that national schedule to play against some of the better players around the country that would have helped as well. But at the end of the day, that didn't hurt his development coming to Indiana. I think it's just, unfortunately, the system that he fell into at Archie Miller's during his tenure. I think if he came in as a freshman with a Mike Woodson offense set up, I think that's a different conversation that we're having. You know, I never want to see players transfer out. I never, you know, like to talk about players transferring out because it's just such a sticky situation. But, you know, sometimes it's better for some of these players just to go somewhere else and get one of these fresh starts because Christian Laettner still has a lot of talent. He's still a talented kid. He can still do stuff on the floor. He's shown it at times throughout his Indiana career of short segments of really, really high level play. But it's just obviously the consistency and the more so this year, there's just the lack of ability on the defensive end. And it, you know, with Jalen Hood-Schifino coming in, Gabe Cupps coming in the year after, the point guard room is going to be a very talented room here in the future. And if you're not doing everything to show that you deserve minutes on the floor and improving in a big way, you know, you're not going to get minutes in a Mike Woodson system. And he's shown that this year. He's going to put guys on the floor that, one, can play defense and are going to give a lot of effort and energy. And if you're not doing both of those things, you're probably not going to see time. So a lot of guys are going to have to take a hard look at themselves, you know, in the mirror in this offseason and say, do I want to go through this grind again with Mike Woodson and be part of kind of this next elevation that the program is looking to take next year? Because I think there's a lot of guys on this roster that learned a lot this year for the better or the worse, but are now going to have to decide if they want to be part of that moving forward. And for Indiana's sake, right, you know, I hope they are. And I hope that they do a lot to improve over the offseason because Indiana still has a long ways to go before they get back to competing for a Big Ten title. And at the end of the day, that's what Mike Woodson is out to do. That's what he wants to do. And the only way to do that is with guys who are bought in every single second in every single game. And he had that this year. But if you go through another offseason here of guys improving, guys getting better, guys kind of staying the same, and you go into next year and some of these guys see that their minutes aren't there that they thought, that's obviously going to be another sticky situation. And you're always going to have that. But Indiana needs to do a lot with its roster. And I think you're going to see some guys get pushed out that may want to stay. And that's due to Mike Woodson trying to make this roster better and ready to compete, you know, atop of the Big Ten Conference.
Alec, I'm going to ask this question simply to piss off John because he doesn't want to hear about it. How badly was your bracket busted with Kentucky's loss? Did you have them going to the Final Four? Because I just want to make this announcement publicly that of the Saturday Tradition Saturday Down South crew that picked, I was the only one that still has their Final Four intact. Now, that could change drastically today, but that game was incredible. I wasn't so surprised. We've seen the 16 upset the 1. We've seen some 15s upset 2s. It wasn't necessarily surprising to me that was a hard-fought game, but the fact that Kentucky was up 8 points with, 3-4 minutes to play and then blew it, I mean, that was crazy.
Yeah, I did have Kentucky going to the Final Four. I thought that they were a team – yeah, unfortunately, that they were a team coming in that were one of the better teams in the country. Obviously, they show that obviously with their seed line, but the way that they had played over the last kind of month and a half, 2 months was some of the best basketball in the entire country. And I think when you look at, unfortunately, the injuries that they had to the point guard position with Wheeler and Ty Washington here over the last month of action, that really set them back. And you need good guard play. Obviously, everyone knows that to win college basketball games. You need good guard play to advance in the NCAA tournament. And that's why you see a lot of these higher seeds go on some of these runs, or some of these lower seeds go on some of these runs, because they have junior, senior written teams where those guards have gone through all of these games for 4 years now, and they know what it's like to win. Some of these guys, right, maybe not for St. Peter's, but for some of these other schools that, like a Richmond or many of these other programs that get these big wins, you know, a lot of these guys have been together also for 3-4 seasons. And, you know, it's unfortunate for Kentucky, you know, as an Indiana guy who covers Indiana, right? You know, a lot of people probably don't want to hear me say, you know, it's unfortunate that Kentucky lost that one, but you can't go through this season and not look at Kentucky and say they were definitely one of the best teams in college basketball. You love these March moments for some of these teams that win a game that may never get back to the NCAA tournament. But at the same time, it's also difficult to see now a Kentucky team that I thought had one of the best rosters in all of college basketball, the way that it was put together from top to bottom. Now, out in the first round. So that's why this time of year is so much fun. That's why the first round games are incredible. That's why I hope the NCAA does not do anything to change the first four or the first round or anything with scheduling, because you can't go through a full day yesterday and look at yourself today and say, I don't want to do that again.
Right.
And luckily we get to do that again for the next 3 days here, and the games and the pressure is just going to get even better. And that's why this time of year is so much fun. And then on the flip side, that's why this time of year is so difficult, because only one team wins it, and that your season is going to be over at some point here in the next few days potentially. And that's the good and bad thing about college basketball in this time of season and in this type of year. But yeah, NCAA basketball in March Madness is definitely one of the best events, and I think yesterday just proved that over again.
Last question, Alec, I'm going to let you go. Objectively, what is worse, losing by 30-plus points to a good St. Mary's team, or losing just in general or in overtime to the number 15 seed St. Peter's Peacocks? Emphasis on the mascot name.
I definitely think it's a bigger blow for Kentucky in this situation, because you look at their aspirations as a team. Indiana was not going to win the national championship this year. Was not going to get to a Final Four. And Kentucky had those aspirations and had the team to do it. And for it to their season now to be completely over is a tough pill to swallow for not only all of those Kentucky fans, but I know for John Calipari, because he had a team that definitely could compete this year at the top of college basketball.
Well, Alec, thanks for joining us this morning, sticking around. We got more coming up. Obviously, we'll talk to Alec next week as we kind of get into the off season, talking about recruiting and all that good stuff. We'll have Zach Osterman coming up next, I think. Have not heard from him, but we'll see if he's with his being out in Portland, just like Jim. We'll see if he joins us. But thanks again, Alec, for joining us, and we'll be right back right after this.
We'll be right back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
Andy Moore Honda.
Cool.
Thanks, Alec.
I hope maybe you'll hear from Jim, maybe you won't. But always good talking with you guys.
We'll see you, man.
Have a good weekend, Alec.
You too. Enjoy the games.
Dustin, you're going to hear me messing with some music for a second because I have a bump. Boom, 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 boom. All right, where do we find a good place? There we go. There we go.
Maybe we got a remix going on here.
A remix?
We got Scratch the Record. I don't know what that stuff's called.
Oh. It's called Retro Groove.
There we go.
I feel like we might not hear from Zach this morning, but he's also
That's
late
fine.
sometimes, so we'll see. If not, we'll if he doesn't show up, we'll deviate away from the Indiana talk for a few minutes, and we'll go into maybe just go into what happened yesterday and with some of our picks, things we got right. Yeah, talk about your nature walk. I'll talk about your nature walk.
There we go.
You went 2-1 in that, right?
Well, on the nature walk, I was 2-0. The other one was literally.
Oh no, you have Purdue today too, though. So you're still waiting.
Purdue, right.
Well, technically, you had Yale, I guess, but
I thought about that. That could also be Chattanooga Mocks, because I am within an hour and a half drive of Chattanooga. So,
but what is a mock?
Moccasin, I don't know.
But you're thinking Chattanooga Choo Choo.
But they're the. I mean, their mascot's a train.
It is.
Yeah.
That's.
I mean, Chattanooga is known for its freight.
Yeah, that's why I've heard.
Freight.
I've heard the Chattanooga Choo Choo before. That's why I mentioned that. But I'll check on the standings of the Indiana Sports Beat Radio.
There you go.
Bracket challenge. I checked them this morning just to see where I was at, but I didn't look to see who was. I didn't look at everybody. If it wants to load, maybe it won't.
Maybe.
Really? Don't do this to me, man. There we go. I do like the name of the person who's in first place. Not that it's funny, but it's just a different name. It's not somebody's actual name. John, how many couch fires were in Kentucky last night?
I was going to ask that same thing.
Ooh, I've got to read a tweet. That reminds me. I got to read a tweet, and I hope I can find it. We're coming back, though, so we'll see.
Next one, Cheryl Sizemore from Remax Advanced Realty. Let Cheryl Sizemore get you in the home you want today. Cheryl at IndyHomePros.com.
This segment is brought to you by Remax Advanced Realty, Indy Home Pros team by Cheryl Sizemore. Now back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
Welcome back to Indiana Sports Beat Radio. We can still have fun even though Indiana's out of the tournament, obviously. It's still March Madness. There's still plenty of things going on. We have our Indiana Sports Beat Radio Bracket Challenge. Dustin has his shooting from the hip bracket challenge. We'll take a look at our standings here in a second, but somebody brought up in the comments section, since Indiana fans like to hate on Kentucky and enjoy their misery sometimes, including myself. I won't act like I don't enjoy that. But Tebow says, John, how many couch fires were in Kentucky last night? I don't have the answer to that. But what I do have is a tweet. Someone quoted this and screenshotted it. And before I get into what the actual tweet says, this person screenshotted and said this. This was the third tweet on the official UK basketball page. I don't even need to browse any further. And somebody whose name I will not read out loud. It's not anybody I know, but there's no reason to expose a human being for mishaps. But this person tweeted at the official Kentucky basketball page, I just smashed my TV in front of 30 guests at my party because of that game. My wife just took our crying kids and said they're all spending the week at a hotel. This team has ruined my life and my party. I can't handle this anymore. Goodbye, Kentucky. I am no longer a fan. That is hardcore. And I'm not saying that in a complimentary way.
Are we sure that this is not like a bot? Because have you ever seen, if you see the results from like posted on the team accounts a lot, there's like a bot that says there's like a flurry of like 10 straight tweets where it just says something similar to that. And
you've seen stuff like this before?
I've seen stuff like that. Now I don't know. But here's the thing. Usually if it's like a one-off tweet, then it's usually real. But if it's under, like if Kentucky posts the score on their official Twitter account, a lot of times the response will be from these trolls or bots or whatever that just make stuff up.
In all honesty, that makes sense, because why, if that actually happened, why would anybody share that on social media? Unless you were just too intoxicated to have any sense with right there.
Well, because we're all idiots and we all share way too much on social media, myself included, by the way. I put Twitter back on my phone for March Madness, and I cannot wait to get it back off once this thing ends, because it just consumes your life, man. Like I don't know, it's crazy. But some people just share way too much on there.
Yeah, it's nuts. People get so angry. I know it depends on what sport it is, but different.
Can you imagine? Like, let's say that happened for real. Can you imagine going through? I'm skeptical that this happened. You're going to have to share this tweet with me in the next break. But let's pretend it happened. Let's imagine you went from the extreme anger from watching Kentucky lose to breaking your television. Then you go down maybe to probably the lowest point in your life when your wife and kids is leaving you to go stay in a hotel, probably coming back with divorce papers. And then to settle down and be like, you know what? I think I'll share this on Twitter. This is a good idea. Like the range of emotions that one individual would have to go through for that to happen is just incredible.
Yeah, that's some deeper mental issues. Like, and that's another thing that makes you wonder why you would share that. The police have to be involved in a situation like that. They have to be.
Well, you don't know what's on social media. You never know what's real and what's not. So, I mean, unless they were, I don't know. Again, I'm skeptical that this happened. Very skeptical.
And I am too. I think I was initially, but there are some crazy Kentucky fans, man.
There's crazy
they're not all
fans.
like that. It's like every family. There's crazy Indiana fans. There's crazy Nebraska fans.
See, this is where I get to on a lot of this stuff that's posted. And even when you see like the videos of some of this stuff happening, there's a level of me that believes that a lot of this stuff is staged that you see, like people breaking like $1,000 TVs. I'm like, do you really have that little self-control? I feel like a lot of it's it's either set up or staged or something. Like, let's watch the game on this old TV that we're getting rid of anyway, and let's go get 1,000 likes and retweets on Twitter and TikTok and Instagram and all that stuff. Just how I feel about it.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, if you're in it for what do they say? Do it for the Vine. That's my generation. Obviously, Vine is no longer a thing, and TikTok has overtaken that. But the saying used to be, "Do it for the Vine." It wouldn't matter what it was. You're going to do it to be noticed on social media. And that really is the day and age that we live in. I mean, some people, it may not even be about how much money they have. They just want to do something absolutely ridiculous. And it's hilarious. I enjoy the entertainment value of it, but it doesn't seem like a very healthy way to go about your life. But who am I to judge that, honestly?
I'll judge it. Let me tell you. Having been there, not to that point, but let me just say that if anybody who is on Twitter or social media and you feel very unproductive, I mean, just delete those things off your phone for a week and your life gets instantly better. I mean, I'm not even joking. Like, this isn't supposed to be a serious conversation, but when I deleted Twitter off my phone, I mean, I cannot tell you how much more of my life opened up. And that just goes to show like the pull that these outlets have. It's crazy, man. Like it takes control of your life because I feel like I'm one of those people. Like, I tell myself I don't care about likes and retweets, but when that app is on my phone, I open it if I get 10 or 15 notifications or whatever the case might be. So it's very hard to get out of that. I have to have it on there this time of year for work. And the same thing during football season. But man, come April, that thing is going right back off.
But it's one of those things, like, it's so fun whenever things are going right and maybe you have something, you're interacting with a lot of fun people and comments and stuff like that. That's when Twitter is at its best. But there are way too many toxic users on there that just use it as a way to hide themselves from reality and expose their worst self because they think that nobody can do anything about it. And there's so many accounts, almost every account that you'll see on Twitter that is full of negativity and will call out every single individual for something they got wrong. They almost don't ever have a picture of themselves as the profile picture.
That's a great point. Yep.
That's what I'm saying. They use it as an outlet to get out their anger, put it on somebody else, and it won't come back to haunt. I mean, maybe it could. Maybe they'll be discovered who it is. But all these character accounts, it's funny. Yeah. But if you're using it as an outlet to make somebody else's life miserable, that's when Twitter is at its absolute worst.
Right. I mean, it used to be a lot of fun, a lot of jokes, but now it can be there's still a lot of good people. Like, I feel like I do have a really good following. And so there's a lot of really good people out there, but at the same time, I mean, you get into I call it the dark web. I mean, like it can get brutal out there, man. It gets brutal.
Let's get an update on the Indiana Sports Beat Radio Tournament Challenge right now. In first place, his name is Geronimo's Vertical. Love the name. I think that's pretty clever.
Good name.
He's in solely first place, which is very rare at this point in the tournament. Usually a lot of people have the same picks, but he's the only person in the Indiana Sports Beat Radio Bracket Challenge of over 40 plus in sole first place. My bracket, my name is Woody's Warriors on there. I'm tied for 13th with numerous other people. And there's a lot of people tied, but the big takeaway, and I guess we could say we have a few people tied for second. But whenever you're in this stage of the bracket challenges, it's hard to really see who's going to actually come out on top. Obviously, the key to winning your bracket challenges, and I've learned this over the years, is your Final Four needs to stay intact. If your Final Four can make it, if you can get at least 3 of your 4 teams, specifically if one of those three are your national champion, you're in pretty good hands of winning your bracket challenge, I feel like.
You know what I always do every year when I do this, because ESPN and some of those other outlets will allow you to fill out multiple brackets. One of the fun exercises to go through for me anyway is I do one bracket to just kind of follow along and go straight chalk. Just pick the higher seed in every game and then do the 1 seeds and see how that turns out.
Yeah,
and in some years,
I don't know if I've done that before, but that's interesting.
It's like I said, it's just kind of like a guide. Like, here's what it would look like if you use this as your serious bracket and you picked all the top seeds in every single game, what would it look like? And there was one year where I won a bracket and it wasn't even close. I don't remember what it was. And I feel like there was a decent amount of upsets in that season, but it's not.
There was a year, I don't know if this is the season you're talking about, and I don't know how long ago it's been, but I know it's been in my lifetime because I participated in this when I was a young boy. But all 4 1 seeds advanced to the Final Four. And that may have happened since this time, but that happened while I was in elementary school. I believe it was Pittsburgh. I mean, it was back when Pittsburgh was good. That's weird to think about, but for some reason that's the only team that stands out. I know there were 3 other teams and they were all the 1 seeds.
Right. And I mean, it's just very interesting to kind of follow it along because, yeah, you might get that 1-6 seed or you might get the double-digit seed that gets to the Elite Eight or the Final Four or whatever. But generally speaking, you're going to have in your Elite Eight a lot of higher seeds. I mean, that's why the tournament's set up that way. So it's just a fun thing to go through. Like I said, I don't ever use that as my the bracket that I use in terms of, when we're competing with friends or whatever the case might be. But I just always kind of use that as a guide. Like, here's what it would look like if we just picked all the teams. Would it win? Would it be in a landslide? Would it get dead last? It's just, for me, it's just kind of fun to follow that along.
Yeah, absolutely. Who's ahead in shooting from the hip right now?
Oh God, I don't know. I mean, there's just so many names. Hold on, I got to bring it up here on this trusty Google device. We also have a solo leader. Ivy for the win is at 140, and then a handful at 130, and then a couple at 120. We're tied then. I'm at 15th as well. So, not a bad start. Not a bad start to being 15th out of a 40-plus bracket.
And like I said, the key is absolutely to keep your Final Four. Now, obviously, if everybody else, if someone has the same Final Four as you, you want to have some different picks in the lower rounds, like some upsets and that kind of thing, which I don't believe I was successful in any of my upset picks yesterday. I didn't have Richmond. I had Iowa going out to the Elite Eight. That's one I'm glad. That's one that I'm glad I didn't fall for the Final Four bait. I know I came very close to it, and a lot of people took it. What do you got, Dustin? You're shaking your head.
Well, I was going to say, I went on my walk yesterday. I took Biscuit out. And sometimes, okay, let me start this. I don't know how long we have until the next break, but let me start this by saying, I don't remember Super Bowl, insert Roman numeral here, when the Patriots played the Eagles. I remember I lived in Florida at the time, and I went on a walk, and I saw 3 bald eagles in a tree, like overlooking a lake. And I texted one of my buddies who's a big gambler, and I said, I just saw 3 bald eagles in Florida. I haven't seen them in the 2 years I lived here. Take Philadelphia and on the money line, and they won. So yesterday I was taking Biscuit for a walk, and I kid you not, first of all, I hate birds. I think they can sense my fear. I don't like them. They follow me. They fly. Yesterday, there were 2 blue jays fighting, and like one of them dive bombed me in this. I don't know what they were trying to. I don't know if it was like a mating thing or if they were attacking each other. A battleground area. I don't know, but I got dive bombed by a blue jay. So obviously, Creighton, the Blue Jays. I took that as a sign, and then. Like 2 blocks later, I was walking, and on this telephone pole was like the most perfectly constructed spider web that I've ever seen in my entire life. And for it to be downtown, by the way, not even in like the woods where it's going to be untouched, I was like, this is a sign. And Richmond beat Iowa, and Creighton beat San
Diego State.
San Diego State, yeah. So 2-0 in the nature picks. I did talk with the bartender here at a barbecue place here. She's from Vermont, so I went with the Catamounts. They did not win, but that's not really nature-y. That's just an encounter.
Well, there you go. Yeah, Dustin's nature picks / random encounter picks. Plus, you do have Purdue as part of your picks as well for today. You heard
as
train
I was coming
passing,
home,
correct?
As I was coming home, now people might be able to hear it sometimes when I'm on this show, but like behind my apartment complex, there's a railroad, and there's probably a train that goes by, I would guess 12 to 15 times a day. I mean, it's pretty frequent. And yesterday it got stuck right at the intersection, right where right where the railroad crossing is. And so traffic was backed up to all the way to Marietta, which I now know people listening in Indiana probably have no reference for that. But it was crazy. So I sent out the tweet, a train came to a screeching halt, Yale, but also Chattanooga. You never know. One of those teams could lose. They play Illinois, so maybe it's Illinois Sharpie. I don't know.
I would say in honor or in theory, you shouldn't be. You already said it was Purdue. It has to stay.
I did say it was Purdue. So I know there's going to be a lot of people listening that probably hope I'm right. There's also a lot of people on Twitter who are Purdue followers who probably hope I'm dead wrong.
And all in all, before we get to break, I'm just sick of the Big Ten not living up to the hype going into the NCAA tournament.
We can talk about
every
that.
year, and it gives Seth Davis all of this ammo because he comes in every season, at least this season in particular, acting like the Big Ten's overrated, and right now it's living up to what he's been talking about. So we'll talk more about that. We got our good friend Jeffrey the Greek coming up. You're listening to Indiana Sports Beat Radio. We're back right after this.
We'll be right back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
Whether you're visiting...
What's going on, Greek?
How we doing?
We're doing.
I'm doing shitty. I can answer that question pretty quick.
I gotta grab some bump music real quick, so you're gonna hear some stuff playing in the background because I'm doing it all this morning.
Gotcha.
Let's see. Almost. All right. I'll tell you what's funny, Jeff, and we can talk about it on the air. And maybe I shouldn't like this person, but Cyclone Larry has been killing me.
He's hilarious. I'm not giving that fucker props on this show, though. I'll tell you that much. He can find his own way on.
Is that really what he looks like, by the way? His profile picture?
He's like a 20-year-old kid in college.
So who is that picture of? Is some random dude?
I don't know where he found that thing. It's hilarious, though.
It fits the personality of the Twitter account for sure.
How much time we got before we're back from break?
About minute 50.
Okay. Quick story. I wouldn't be able to tell on air.
No, we are live on YouTube, just full disclosure.
Oh, we are?
Break on the radio. That's how it always works.
It's been that way the whole time?
Yes, it's always been like that. Have you ever shared anything bad? I don't feel like you have.
I have not known that this entire time. Oh my gosh. Okay.
So it's always it's live because it's a live stream, but it's the radio breaks in between.
All right. Okay, this isn't like rated X or anything, but I don't partake in alcohol all day long these days, but I did yesterday. So it was keg beer all day long, which again is my nemesis. I can't do that. So it was keg beer after it, and I fast on Wednesday, so I had nothing to eat all day Wednesday and Thursday morning. Keg beer all day long. I was starving so bad that I made the Uber driver go through Burger King last night. So me and Me and the Uber driver, I bought him I'm like, you never had a Burger King chicken sandwich. I'm like, oh man, you are in for a treat, So I buy him a chicken sandwich. I had a Whopper. This morning is donuts with dad at my kindergartner school. Halfway through donuts with dads, I'm like, oh no. And I had to go to the small side bathroom.
Oh no.
I just destroyed that thing. And I walk out of the bathroom and there's this nice 25-year-old teacher. And she just like looked at me and I'm like, oh boy, I'm sorry, lady. And I just got the heck out of there. I hope I never see her ever again.
All right, here we go.
Or online at brinkersjewelers.com. This segment is brought to you by Courtroom Sports Grill in Bedford. Now back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
Welcome back, Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Dustin Schutte this morning. Jeffrey the Greek now joining us as we continue this. We've turned it into a party. It was very somber at first, Jeff, because obviously we were talking about everything that went wrong for the Hoosiers yesterday, but we've kind of transitioned into this more fun March Madness-y in general type of show because all in all, yesterday was fantastic. No matter who you root for, we got to see a lot of good games, a lot of good upsets. What do you got, Jeff?
It's going to change one letter. We're going to call it March Sadness for now. I feel awful. That train that Dustin was just talking about, that hit me yesterday right about 4:15 or so, and that's how she goes. That's life in the fast lane.
And unfortunately, your Iowa Hawkeyes were really the first victim of the upset. I guess if you want to consider Michigan over Colorado State an upset, I get it by seeding. It really technically was. But the first really surprising upset yesterday was Iowa losing to Richmond.
Yeah, I'm honestly interested in your guys' take because I don't want any of this to come off as an excuse, but I sat there because we haven't talked since the Iowa-Indiana game for the Big Ten tournament. I sent a tweet out that day that said, here's what's important to me today. Number 1, stay healthy. Number 2, keep the mojo. And then I purposely put a bunch of spaces down. And number 3, win the game. Because honestly, at that point, I saw the benefit of Iowa losing and just going home to get some rest. Yeah. In my mind, I don't know if you guys saw Brad Underwood's press conference after Illinois lost and went out early. He was like, yeah, that's fine. No big deal. I mean, honestly, he could not have cared less. Again, you got to figure out a way to battle through it, but 4 games in 4 days and then flying out to Buffalo 2 days later, like I saw the shots yesterday. That's the worst Keegan Murray's looked in 3 months. Like all of his shots were short. We're going to have a big conversation, I think, as a conference on the style of the Big Ten tournament and when we're having it, because that thing should get over at least a day sooner on Saturday.
I tend to agree with that. However, here's my however. This is my devil's advocate. When I look back at the history of the Big Ten tournament, traditionally, those teams that win the Big Ten tournament, now the last 2 years are the exception, traditionally those teams make it to the second weekend. Okay. And so at that point, because I would have agreed with you, because I think back to 2016 Michigan State that won the Big Ten tournament and then got beat by Middle Tennessee State as a 2 seed, and then Illinois, and then obviously Iowa this year. What was interesting is I thought we were going to see something like, half the time the team's out by the first round or the second round. Really, that wasn't the case. In Michigan State, 2019, 2018, both those teams made the Final Four. So I think it comes down to matchups. And I think we talked about this even maybe just on Twitter. The thing that I was concerned about with Iowa was their defense is not good enough to where if they're not hitting shots, they're not good enough to beat anyone. You know what I mean? Whereas you look at Indiana in that Wyoming game, they played like garbage in the first half offensively, but their defense kept them in that game. I don't know. I tend to agree. Look, you want to win the Big Ten tournament, but I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to lose that game and kick your feet up for a few days before you start preparing for your next opponent. I do think that there's some legitimacy to that argument.
Yeah, Jeff Dillinson, who we have on this show frequently, describes the thought that you're talking about. He said yesterday during the Iowa game, watching Iowa struggle against Richmond, it's another data point in favor of my thought that the Big Ten really needs to re-examine the format of its conference tournament. The conference forces its best teams to play 3 games in 3 days, 4-4 in the case of Iowa, less than a week before the NCAA tournament. No wonder Iowa looks gassed. If you're looking for a reason this conference underachieves in the NCAA tournament every year, that's it right there.
That is definitely part. I mean, I don't think it's the whole reason, so I agree with most of that. I think the Big Ten, the entire Big Ten conference for basketball is quite similar to the Big Ten West in football, which is it's really good, better than what people probably realize, but there's no elite team, and that's what happens in the tournament. There just isn't an elite team. I mean, when I was whining about Iowa after the Big Ten tournament, I meant to include Indiana in there too, because they played quite a few games in the tournament, the play-in game, and then turn around. I thought they looked gassed yesterday as well. So it's not just Iowa. I wanted to make that point. Dustin, that's interesting. We were wondering the exact same thing yesterday when I was with buddies, like how the Big Ten champion from the tournament has. So I appreciate you doing that research. I've only remembered this year and last year, and I knew that was the case, but going over time, I find that interesting. I don't know what the answer is. I hate that Seth Davis is going to have his schmarmy takes rewarded, but it looks like it's, and I mean, I'm cheering for every Big Ten team now, at least to get one of them in the final. Well, almost one, all but one, that I'm going to cheer for in the tournament. I hope we can get one into the Final Four.
Here's what I think is the bigger issue, both John and Jeff. To me, what this comes down to is when you look at the style of play in the Big Ten and then come the NCAA tournament, the Big Ten has to do something about the officiating, because there is absolutely, you watch those games throughout the course of the regular season, there is no flow to the way those games, and it's a physical league. I get it. This conference really tends to thrive on big men and physical play, and I understand you got to call that. But I mean, in the tournament, you're running the floor. It's a completely different game. To me, that's a bigger factor than the Big Ten tournament situation. And again, I think in certain situations, the Big Ten tournament, I mean, the problem to me for Iowa was they shot so well that entire tournament. Eventually, water's going to find its level a little bit. But I think the way the game is officiated, if that game is being stopped every 35 seconds because of a whistle, Iowa's in a much better position than Richmond, I think. So To me, that's what the Big Ten needs to look at and say, how can we officiate these games so we have our teams prepared to play in March? Because to me, at least the last couple of years, that's been the biggest issue.
I put a tweet out during that Iowa-Purdue game that there's Pac-12 football games that aren't as physical as this basketball game is. It was insane. I mean, just I think, like, I'm not going to sit here and say Iowa's defense is stellar, but it did wind up 5th in the Big Ten in defensive efficiency by the end of the year. They improved a lot by the end of the year. The issue yesterday is the same issue that can happen to any team at any time, which is one of two factors. You either have a bad night shooting or the other team has a great night shooting. There ain't a style, an official, there ain't, nobody can do anything about that. That just happens. That's just the sports gods either shining down on you or raining down on you. And yesterday I just couldn't make a shot. There were open shots. Right. It wasn't like, it wasn't like, the other team had wide open shooters and everything. I just couldn't make a shot. I mean, it happens. Like, and you sit there and you're like, all it takes is a couple shots to go in. The confidence comes back. I thought we got there at about the 8-minute mark, but that was it. And then they didn't go in again.
I got to ask you about one other thing in the Iowa game, and it was towards the end. You were talking about the officials earlier. But the refs seem to swallow their whistles at some of the most important moments. Yeah. Obviously, the one that sticks out the most was the missed foul on the three-pointer. And then you had a subsequent one after that. But I don't even know how you explain that. I mean, that's legitimately game-changing right there.
Is it okay? Wisconsin fans jump all over me if I complain about the refs. Am I allowed? Am I allowed to say that was definitely a foul on Chris Murray at the end of the game? It sure looked like it was to me. And you're like, that doesn't decide the game. It kind of decided the game a little bit, like not calling that, not having. I mean, that was a huge call in the game,
especially when Richmond. It seemed like they were getting every and one call on the other end during the past 2 to 3 minutes of the game.
You know what always bugs me about that? There are times when you can look at the officiating and be like, that wasn't the biggest difference. And like you said, Iowa could have hit some shots. But look at the Saints-Falcons from that NFC Championship game a few years ago. Look at that play from Thursday. Like, okay, I understand when people say officiating didn't decide the game. I'm like, then why the hell do we have officials? Like, and sometimes it does make a difference in the game. Other times, I get it. It wasn't the only factor, but there are game-changing calls that happen, and so that's what frustrates me about it. Like, you can't blame the officials. Well, 90% of the time you're probably right, but there is a 10% of the time where there's a big missed call or a big call that doesn't go your way, and it costs your team. And I think that did. Now, maybe that game goes to overtime. Iowa still lose, whatever. So you don't know, but it was a big missed call.
Yeah. And I do believe, like, it's tough for a coach. Like, you can't sit there and complain about the refs all the time, because I think that does send the wrong message to your kids. I mean, they got to play through that stuff, but at the same time, it's the job of the coach to work those refs a little bit. I'm not saying it's an easy job. That job is hard, but with college football and college basketball, I mean, the money that the NCAA makes from this tournament is absolutely immense. We know the money getting thrown around in college football. We can't have professional full-time referees. We can't afford that. Yes, we can. Yes, we can afford that. How has that not happened at this point is beyond me.
I had one last thought, but it just escaped me because I was looking at the clock and I realized, it's time for a break, and I lost my thought. Maybe it'll come back to me. We're going to go ahead and take our next break. We'll wrap it up with this last segment coming up. Listen to Indiana Sports Beat Radio, brought to you by lots of people. We got Courtroom Sports Grill in Bedford right now. We'll be back right after this.
We'll be right back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
Whether you're visiting.
This is really the last segment?
Yeah, we got about 20 minutes left.
Oh, I was going to say, do we end at 10:34, 10:30? I mean, I guess
10:30.
Okay.
Yeah.
23 minutes.
This will be the first full 2-hour show I've hosted without Jim.
Where's Jim?
He answered the phone this morning when I called him, but he did not sound well. He sounded. I don't know if he's sick. I think it's just what's the best word? Major fatigue from traveling and sleep deprivation, and he said he was going to be on, but that didn't happen.
On Wednesday he called in and he hadn't slept in over 24
he was going from Dayton to Minneapolis to Portland.
That catches up with you at some point.
He acted like he was going to join us live on the aircraft.
I told him not to do that.
He hopped on when he got off, but that was the beginning of all the struggles. Anyway, I gotta get some pump music real quick.
Those pictures.
It'll be real quick. All right, that should be good. And now I'm getting a phone call from a scam. All right, sorry about that. Oh. Jim hired me on the weekend Mike Woodson was hired last year. And it was the Monday, maybe he hired me before that, I can't remember. But the Monday after Mike Woodson was hired, he didn't wake up. And I had no rapport with any of his guests, but I knew I was like, this is the day after Mike Woodson was hired. We have to do a freaking show. We can't not do a show.
Yeah.
And it was really nerve-wracking and weird, but that was when I got thrown to the fire pretty early on of working with Jim.
When I saw Jim in like a suit and no hat on when he was in Indianapolis. Like, it didn't even look like him. It was crazy.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of hair. Why is he hiding that hair underneath that hat all the time, man?
Speaking of hiding, that's why I don't have my camera on today. I have not showered. So when I realized Jim wasn't going to be here, I was like, well, I guess I'm going to be cameraless because I don't look appropriate at all to be on anything.
I tell you, the number of times I shower coming on this show is very little.
Well, you look put together though. That's the difference. Like if I turn
put
my
on a
camera
hat.
on, it looked like.
How's my audio, by the way?
You sound great.
I just bought a new speaker.
I was gonna say it sounded not that you've ever sounded bad, but you sound a lot better than normal. That makes sense.
Sweet. That makes me happy that I spent the $50 on that. Then.
All right, here we go.
Simply go to thehoosier.com and sign up. It's free. You can also find full episodes of Indiana Sports Beat Radio on the homepage or on the station every week, Monday through Friday. If we're not on a station where you live, we should be. Ask for Indiana Sports Beat Radio. This segment is brought to you by Aurora Specialty Sleep Clinic. Now back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
Welcome back, Indiana Sports Beat Radio. Wrapping up with this last segment, Jeffrey the Greek and Dustin Schutte with us. We're going to talk a little more about March Madness, everything that's coming up, everything that's gone down. Jeffrey, I'm sure you've filled out a bracket or so, haven't you?
3 of them. Actually, I'm looking at it right now. Actually, before I get to that, out of curiosity, assuming you guys get into multiple pools, is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. So do you fill out the same sheet for every single one, or do you switch it around?
I used to be the person that would fill out multiple sheets, but this year I think is the first year that I've ever just stuck with one bracket.
I usually fill out the same one for every. If I'm in a pool, I fill out the same bracket for each pool so I can follow it easier.
Okay. I'm just like John. I've always filled out multiple sheets, and somehow, even getting into 4 pools, I always wind up right in the middle of the pack of every single pool. Somehow it worked out like that. So I just said, you know what, I'm gonna switch it up. So I went the exact same sheet in every pool. I'm in first in 2 of them, and second.
Look at that.
And the only games I missed yesterday were Kentucky and Iowa, which I got, most people miss those. So, but one guy's in front of me. Anyways, yeah, hoping that, but I had Kentucky in the Final Four in that region. So I need somebody to beat Baylor.
My big saving grace right now is that I have all 4 Final Four teams. And Dustin, I believe you said you did as well.
Yeah, I'm the only one at Saturday Down South, Saturday Tradition, that has all 4 teams. Everybody else had Kentucky. By the way, the University of Kentucky Athletic Department owes me an apology for their comments on Instagram. Just saying.
Oh, really? What is that?
We put it on. We put our picks on Instagram, and the University of Kentucky made a boo Dustin comment because I was the only one in our group to not pick Kentucky. So I made the comment yesterday when I went back on Instagram, like I'll accept any apologies thrown my way. But I did not hear from them immediately after that loss to the St. Peter's PFAL.
That reminds me of midway through the Big Ten season when I predicted Michigan to win the Big Ten, and I got laced by Ohio State fans. Like, my phone was on fire. I'm surprised it didn't burn my hand. I did not hear from them after the loss, though. It's the weirdest thing in the world.
And then how that goes, it's always funny how that works, that they're quick to criticize, but not so quick to compliment.
Yeah, it's fun, though. But that's hilarious that Kentucky, I mean, you kind of got to go back at them today, don't you?
That's what I did yesterday. Yeah.
Good.
After the game, I said I will accept any apologies thrown my direction, and so far, nothing.
I listened to their post-game show last night, and it was one of the most satisfying things that I've ever listened to. That was pretty cool.
Somebody put out there, and I'm not so sure that this is –
Is this the tweet I mentioned earlier? Because this is where I was going next. I was going to give Jeffrey's
this isn't the tweet that you mentioned. Somebody made the comment that I saw that John Calipari is a gym teacher with a budget.
I saw that. That was good.
I know he's won a national championship. He took Memphis to the national championship, but considering the amount of talent he rakes in every single year, how they're not a Final Four team 2 out of every 3 years is kind of astounding.
Yeah.
But Jeff, we were talking about this tweet from a potential tweet. We want to get your thoughts on if you think this is fake or not. This was supposedly posted as a reply to the official Kentucky men's basketball Twitter page after the loss. Yeah. And it goes as follows. I just smashed my TV in front of 30 guests at my party because of that game. My wife just took our crying kids and said they're all spending the week at a hotel. I'm trying not to laugh. I didn't laugh earlier, but I might laugh now. This team has ruined my life and my party. I can't handle this anymore. Goodbye. These reactions, man. These. Goodbye, Kentucky. I am no longer a fan.
I don't think it's real. I think
other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, did you enjoy the play?
Because who would put something so embarrassing like that? I mean, we were talking about this earlier, like I said. The police have to be involved with this. You got to think there's divorce papers coming. I mean, you just said that your kids are crying on social media because you overreacted to a college basketball game.
I tell you what, quick plug. Braden Gall from Athlon Sports is coming on the podcast. We're actually recording that later today. There's going to be some SEC versus Big Ten tense conversations in this recording. And, one of the things that I've always pointed out is it's great to be a fan of your team. I obviously follow the Iowa Hawkeyes very intensely, but if you're starting to rank your college team in front of your wife and kids and your job, I feel like maybe your priorities are a little out of whack. And I feel like I get more of that from the SEC fan base than any other fan base. I could be wrong.
This was my comment about this situation earlier today was, okay, first of all, I think it's a bot, because if you go to some of these, the results when a team posts it, you see stuff like this all the time. And it's usually multiple people posting it. So I think it's fake. But I'm under the assumption, let's just say it is real. Can you imagine going through the type of emotion you have to go through to bust your TV in front of 30 guests, to watch potentially your life just be ruined here as your kids and wife walk out the door to a hotel screaming and crying, and then to settle down enough to go, you know what, this is a good idea to put this on Twitter. Like the mental gymnastics you have to do to get to that point
and then
down that much.
And then what I'm picturing is Mike and Melissa, the party guests. They're driving away from the party, and Melissa's like, God, Pete's a jerk. He's crazy, and John has no choice at that point, but he's got to, or Mike, whatever, he's got to join in. He's got to talk poorly about his buddy Pete, because you can't. Yeah, he just put himself out on an island. It's not worth sticking up for your buddy at that point. He really has no chance.
And we talked earlier too, this kind of transitioned into a conversation about the pros and cons of Twitter and how it can be obviously used as a very happy and interactive place with fans, and doesn't have to be just for sports, but so many other different things. But the dark side of Twitter, or the dark web, as Dustin referred to it as, you have so many people. And I'm not talking about this person specifically, but more so the people who use this as an outlet to get their anger out. They hide behind these fake accounts that don't have real people's profile pictures. And I'm not talking about the guy that we mentioned during the break, but more so people who use this as a place to take their anger out on other people, make their lives miserable because they're miserable. And that's when Twitter is at its absolute worst.
There's not much gray area with Twitter. That's for sure. It's feast or famine. There's one time where I met a Twitter troll in person, and let's just say the fierceness that he showed on Twitter was not there in person when I met him. He was a shrieking violet in person, and my guess is that's probably the case about 95% of the time.
Dustin.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I like it's kind of like the Napoleonic complex, right? Like if you have some insecurities, you're going on Twitter and you're posting about, you're going to be big, bad, tough guy. Where a lot of people that when you meet them and they're good people, they're usually like, they're confident. They don't, I mean, it's a very interesting group. Like I just always think about that guy from South Park who's sitting there with a hand brace on and he's just kind of sitting, typing away at his keyboard, playing a game, but he's got like a nacho cheese stain down the front of his t-shirt, his hair's all disheveled. That's how I imagine like 50% of the Twitter, at least 50% of those Twitter trolls, what they look like.
And I'm telling you, that guy I met that one time, it's almost exactly, I'm dead serious, almost exactly what he looked at. Like, like when John's talking about, people using Twitter about this, predating Twitter has been email, obviously. And you learn a long time in the business world, when you're angry, go ahead and write that email. Don't send it. Wait till the next day, reread it. And then if you still think you can send it. That same piece of advice, should be heeded by people on Twitter. But man, they never do that. They just send that tweet. They hit send and go at it.
Yeah, because the difference here is that you can literally have so many burner accounts that you want. I mean, surely if somebody really wanted to figure out who you were, I think there's a way that you could do that. But most people aren't going to go out of their way to figure out who a Twitter troll is unless they're, like threatening your life or something like that.
So
it's not worth it.
Right.
It depends. I'm not saying that you would have to, but you never know. You never know who's behind a burner account is what I'm kind of getting at.
My line that I say to everybody is I try to, I really do, in business world and personal life, I try to be as honest and truthful as I can. And my line to everybody is, it's because I'm not smart enough to cover my lies. So I have no choice. I feel that same way with burner accounts. If I had switched back and forth between Jeffrey the Greek and a burner account, I would up at some point. So I'm just not even going to put myself in that position. Now, of course, you could basically call Jeffrey. My name is not Jeffrey the Greek. I guess you could say my account is a burner. I don't actually have my last name on it by design, but I'm not exactly hiding who I am either.
That's more of an alias. It's not like people don't know who you are as a human being. You've explained to people who you are before, obviously.
And I've been Jeffrey the Greek.
Last name, but explained as a human being.
Who I am. And I've been Jeffrey the Greek since 2001. This is an alias I've used way before Twitter was a thing. But yeah, I don't know. Long story short, but I tell you what, it's good that I was at a watering hole with buddies yesterday. And I didn't have that good cell phone coverage in there. And I'm like, this is a gift. I'm just going to put this thing in my back pocket and hang out with my buddies the rest of the day.
One thing I've always wondered, and this is more of just, and we don't have to talk about this for long, it can just be a one-off. What's the right word? Deadly, I guess. How deadly is the rivalry between Iowa State and Iowa when the other team loses? And who overreacts more?
Oh, wow. It is a who overreacts more. That's a tie. I don't think there's any winner or loser in that. It's real. I am definitely cheering for Iowa State to get beat today. It's way more personal to me for football, for sure. But the basketball is right there, and honestly, wrestling is right there too. Women's basketball is up there. I mean, it fires up the rivalry. I understand that people from around the country wouldn't spend that much time thinking about the Iowa State rivalry. I can come to terms with that, but don't question us that it's not a rivalry to us. Trust me, it is. And that's been one of the cool things with the podcast is I knew Indiana Purdue was a rivalry. Like I certainly understood that, but I have gotten to understand that rivalry even more since we've gotten the podcast. And, you know, it's some good stuff.
Dustin,
I can't weigh in on the Iowa State because I know from the football perspective, Iowa State. I mean, I'm just going to make the comment like Iowa State is kind of the little brother. I mean, not kind of, but I mean, you look, and I think you look at the Indiana Purdue thing. That's kind of the same case, and that's not necessarily throwing shade at Purdue, but I think when you look at the makeup of those states, I would say probably would you say 70-30 Iowa to Iowa State?
That's fair. Yeah, pretty close to that.
I would say that's probably the same in Indiana, maybe a little bit closer to like 60-40. But when you have such a disparity in the fan bases, like that's why Purdue fans are pretty chippy. That's why Iowa State fans are pretty chippy because even Michigan State. That's why Michigan State fans get pretty chippy on Twitter and some of those other places because when you have such a discrepancy in the amount of fans, I think it charges up that doesn't matter how successful, but that team that doesn't get as much credit, they get fired up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
we got a few minutes left. Jeffrey, you got a comment?
Just to wrap this together, I'm just coming to terms with the fact that in 2007, Iowa lost to Iowa State 15-13, I believe was the score, in one of the most awful football games that's ever been played on the face of the earth. I pretty much was that Kentucky fan at the party that day. It actually ended a relationship that I was currently had with a girl that day. So I guess I can't act like I'm above it all. I'm just older now.
Excuse me for ignoring the comments pretty much almost the entire show, but I caught this out of the corner of my eye, and I had to throw it up there. Can we get a confirmation that Jordan Bohannon is actually leaving Iowa this time?
I believe it is official. Jordan Bohannon is going to go. I don't know if you guys saw my tweet from after he hit the game winner versus Indiana. I said, Jordan Bohannon is going to get to tell his grandkids about hitting that shot, like, you know, in a couple minutes here.
He's my age. That'd be like if I was a good basketball player still in college. I'm the same age as Jordan Bohannon, Jeff. Is that weird for you to think about?
I thought he was closer to my age, to be honest. Like, and I've got something, if I remember this, you know, for the first time since 1999, Iowa will take the floor without Jordan Bohannon. I've got that geared up for the start next season.
It's ready.
It's crazy. But he's not the only one. Brad Davison has been at Wisconsin for 37 years too. Yeah. Like it's the COVID year. I know Bohannon dealt with more injuries, so that's why he got a little bit longer time at Iowa. But the Brad Davison, I think coming into the season or by the end of the season, I don't remember, they had played in a combined like 300 or 325 college basketball games, which is just insane.
I mean, you never know what you believe, but it was something like Jordan Bohannon is older than something like 60% of the guys in the NBA or something. Like I don't know if that's true, but would it really surprise you that much?
Yeah, that's crazy. All right, we got a couple minutes left. Jeffrey, what's coming up for you on the Eyes on Big podcast?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it already. My foil, the Joker to my Batman, Braden Gull, is coming on the podcast. We're recording with him later today. So Eyes on Big Pod, check it out. We put something out pretty much every week, and would love to have a new listener too. So please feel free to click on.
Absolutely. Dustin, what about It's Saturday Tradition?
Just more March Madness stuff. And then probably after this week, we'll dive more into some of the spring football stuff. But for now, it's all March Madness, and hopefully the Big Ten can keep us going into that Sweet 16 Elite Eight realm, because I love this time of year. I love covering this time of year. But last year, 8 of the 9 Big Ten teams in the tournament were done by the first weekend. So hopefully that's not the case again this year.
Yeah, today we've got Wisconsin and Colgate. We've got Illinois and Chattanooga. We've got Purdue and Yale. What else we got? Ohio State, Loyola, Chicago. I'm sure there's a couple more that I'm not thinking of.
Michigan State, Davidson.
And then I think there's one more that I'm not thinking of, but that's usually how it goes. You can never think of the last one. But man, it's been a fun show. We're pretty much out of time here. Thanks, Jeffrey, as always, for joining us. It's been really fun. Dustin, obviously, thanks for twice this week now stepping on and helping me do some of this show. It's been fun. Looking forward to watching some more basketball today. And like Jeffrey just said, I mean, we are really close to football again, which is, I mean, that's how it goes. You get through March Madness and spring football. Once you get through the end of football season, you're getting into the bulk of basketball season. It all connects with each other. You're never really having a moment at this point without sports. So looking forward to all that. Hope you all guys have a great week or weekend, I guess. Excuse me.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. That's going to wrap it up, and that'll do it. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Indiana Sports Beat Radio. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube page for more clips and team coverage of Indiana basketball, football, and more. You can also find full episodes and tons of other content on thehoosier.com. We'll see you next time for another edition of